Well, welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. Now, in the session that I covered in the prior week, I started the conversation regarding the third segment to the series with regards to how to understand depression and how to overcome or conquer depression. Now, when I began this series, I started off by making it clear that when we talk about depression, depression in itself is more of a clinical picture. You have to understand that it's not necessarily a diagnosis. When someone says, I am depressed, you have to ask the question, why? And until you understand the why, it becomes very hard, really, to understand what you're dealing with and what version or what type of depression you might, or what derivative, if I can use that word, of depression you might be dealing with. I made it clear that my perspective of depression needs to be taken in many ways with a pinch of salt. It comes from my worldview, my experiences, you might say the experiences that I have gleaned from other more competent individuals. And I've come up with a philosophy, and as much as I could, I have been trying to provide you with ways of eliminating all of the possible causes so that you arrive at the actual cause of what could be uh, the major, you might say, root to your suffering. I started off by making it clear that one of my worldviews, my philosophy is that humans are very special, unlike other animal forms. We are not necessarily just, we don't occupy or live in one sphere of understanding. We occupy many. I use the reference to being in a trinity, a triunal nature to who we are. We are spiritual beings. At the core, our true essence, the highest, the best, the most noble, and the purest form of who you are and who I am is the spirit. Um, we live, however, that spirit lives in a physical body. And we've been gifted with something called an intellect. The intellect that we have allows us to, in many ways, create a bridge between our spirit and our physical form. In that intellectual ability, we have a mind, and therefore we can create and we can do things. How we use our intellect determines our emotional state. If you want to understand depression at the psychological level or the mental level, you have to understand how the intellect works. In any case, the first two segments have been covered, perhaps with some subtle um, finishing touches to the middle one. But I started the section of spirituality and the spirit last week. In today's session, I want to expand on what I call the fruits of the spirit. And I'm going to tie this in because the sessions that follow subsequently, you will hear me repeat over and over again certain philosophical positions. Reason? The best way we learn is by spaced repetition. Many of us have heard, some of us may not, but many of us have heard of the word, the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, you might say goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. And all of these fruits identify what we consider to be our spiritual fruits. In other words, at our purest form. If you were to allow spirit to manifest itself, to express itself, you would see spirit move in a kind way, in a gentle way, in a way that is peaceful, in a way that brings joy to other people's presence, in a gentle way, with some self-control. That is spirit. Those are the fruits of the spirit. In many ways, you've heard the saying that by their fruits you shall know them. An apple tree cannot bear orange fruits, and an orange tree cannot bear apple fruits, because by their fruits you will know them. Those who live an abundant life exhibit some aspects, perhaps not all of it, but some aspects of the fruits of the Spirit. In other words, these people are in tune with their most authentic and original self. there's a softness. In many ways, you see the acts of kindness and love and patience can be so intoxicating that everybody wants to be around them. Depression is simply an antidote to the fruits of the Spirit. Now, the depression, as I explained in the session prior, is a physical. It can be, let me rephrase that, it can be more of a physical thing. It can also be a mental thing. But equally importantly, it can be the absence or evidence of the absence of the fruits of the Spirit. In other words, your spirit has lost essence of its true self, either based on perhaps the way you've put your spirit in chains by omission or by commission, and therefore you're not living your true self. Now, let me juxtapose this position with something called the 7 deadly sins. Some years ago, many years ago, there was a movie that was made called Seven. Brad Pitt and I think it's Morgan Freeman played, and some other great actors and actresses played the movie. The 7 deadly sins deal with, you might say, qualities or attributes that put us in chains and limit us rather than liberate and celebrate us. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. Sloth representing laziness. In the West, and I'm going to move into how this applies particularly to the modern West, what you tend to find, without addressing the West just yet, the fruits of the Spirit and the 7 deadly sins are opposite of each other. Now let me bring in a third picture, because I think you will see how this all connects, which is what we call the virtues. In this particular instance, to keep it consistent with the second item I mentioned, 7 deadly sins, let's call it the 7 virtues, the 7 celebrated virtues: humility, kindness, patience, diligence, temperance, abstinence, and chastity. Now, I am throwing so many words at you, but I hope you keep those words in mind and let those words start to germinate in your subconscious. And the reason is because the sessions that follow, you're going to see me try to weave a tapestry of ideas. And I'm going to try and explain and show how, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but in my opinion, how on the spiritual level, a lot of the depression we suffer is not based on something that is happening to us, but instead is primarily based on the absence of certain qualities and virtues that we have shunned, and therefore we are suffering because the spirit, which is the real essence of who we are, is at war with who we are on the outside. If you take the spirits, or the fruits of the spirits rather, and you place it next to, or the listed qualities of the fruits of the spirit, and you place them next to what I call the 7 virtues, you find similarity between both. There are some subtle differences, but fundamentally what you tend to find is consistency. There is some integrity between what's the fruits of the Spirit and the virtues that we have. On the opposite side, we have the 7 deadly sins. Let me go back a few steps. Many sessions ago, I started by talking about how ignorance is the cause of all of our suffering. There's something we don't know. You are not suffering because of depression. You're suffering because of your ignorance of what depression really means and the antidote to depression. And you're operating within the negative frequency, vibration, energy, focus, rather than the positive. You have depression and you have expression. You have death and destruction, and you have life and abundance. And I started the whole conversation by explaining that on one side is ignorance and on the other side is knowledge. Knowledge of the truth. And one of the things one has to learn about life is what is the truth and what is true. Not always the same thing. We search for true things and we hope to arrive at the truth eventually. But we have to be aware of the fact that ignorance every single day is fighting against our most optimal state. If you don't stand guard, ignorance moves in. When you have ignorance, you tend to find that because the seeds of destruction, you tend to find that that ignorance leads to worry and doubt. Those who suffer from depression always have an excited level of worry and doubt in their lives, for whatever reason, justified or unjustified. But that worry and doubt exists. When worry and doubt persists for long enough, you tend to find it leads to fear. So most people who are depressed tend to struggle with life because they're usually fearful. They're fearful about what could happen next. They're fearful about not expressing themselves as they think and they know that they can. That fear, we do something strange with fear. Fear is false expectations that appear to be real, false evidence that appear to be real. But they're powerful because our mind is just an incubator. It takes whatever we give it as input and it magnifies that and it gives it back to us. That fear will manifest itself in anxiety. Why? Because one of the things we tend to do when we are fearful is we hibernate. We lock ourselves in. We shut the gates because we think that there is more harm coming our way. So we don't share our concerns and our worries and our doubts. We keep it to ourselves. And suddenly, the human body, sadly, cannot take that much, you might say, evidence, that much weight of emotional vibration that is so negative. So it has to manifest itself through the body. It has to express itself through the body. Anxiety expresses itself through the physical body. So those who actually are depressed and suffer from depression, you tend to see it in their physical body. A breakdown of their health from the physical side, a breakdown of their mental wealth and well-being. And that breakdown, if it's not expressed, in other words, if it's not shared, in order to find solutions, what we find is that anxiety leads to depression. Depression is simply a symptom of an underlying cause. And what I'm suggesting in today's session is that the root cause of all of that is ignorance of who you really, really are. You're not a physical being. You're a spiritual being. You live in a physical body and you have an intellect. And as a spiritual being, and that being the purest form of who you really, really are, there are certain fruits. A tree has to bear fruits if it has the capability. And I am suggesting that you have the capability to bear fruits because you are a spirit. And a spirit is not impotent. And therefore, the fruits of your spirit would normally be love and joy and peace and forbearance and kindness and you might say goodness, faithfulness, godliness, gentleness, self-control, and the list goes on. And those fruits are virtues. Those virtues, recognized in this physical world we live in, are always under attack. And so what you tend to find is most of us are having a displacement take place in our psyche. The deadly sins are displacing the virtues that we have as part of our natural right, birthright. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. Now, the key question therefore becomes, if you accept everything that I have shared, how do you make that transition? Now, that's something I will deal with in the sessions to follow. But let me try and pull together together today's session to a point of conclusion by saying as follows. As a spiritual being, or rather as a spirit, that is limited and restricted by the physical bounds or the physical universe we live in. The expression of your fruits requires work. Actually, it requires a choice. That choice has to be made on a daily basis, especially in a world that is so much more, much different than what it used to be. Now, let me bring in this whole concept of in the West and in the modern West. Isn't it fascinating that in one of the few areas in the world where we've had the most prosperity, where the wealthiest we've ever been, we have the most access to healthcare and all of the possibilities that we need with regards to the human body. We're the most free in terms of free from suffering and wars and struggle. We have more abundance because we have access to more innovation and technology and intelligence. However, we seem to be the most depressed. In the UK, for example, 1 in 3 women are on some antidepressant medication. For men, 1 in 3 men are on similar medication. But even much worse than that, the stats for men is even terrible. Between age 10 and 15, 10 and 14 really, boys and girls commit suicide at a similar rate. Between 15 and 19, it doubles for men over boys. Between 19 and 24, it goes to 4 times for men compared to women. Say between 25 and about 35, 36-ish, that number goes up to about 6x or 6 times. And what's fascinating is that between 40 and 45, up to about age of retirement, 85 or 90, that number goes as much as 20x compared to women. And the reason is why. Why are we killing ourselves much more as men in a world where there is abundance? One of the reasons is because in the West, when it comes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have solved the main problems we had, such as our physiological needs, our safety and security needs. We moved into self-esteem and self-love, and then we're now at the point of self-actualization. We've lost sense in our pursuit of more. We've lost sense of who we really are. But more importantly, the philosophies and the groundings that undergirded the West, Great Britain, for example, particularly, have been thrown away. The Western civilization, our Judeo-Christian values, the inheritances we got from the great and the silent generation, we've tossed them aside. And we've promoted this whole concept of relativism. The fact that there is no moral philosophy that is more superior. The fact that most people should pursue whatever makes them happy. And what we've found after many, many years and decades of trying this is that it doesn't bring happiness. As a matter of fact, it makes us more depressed. If all of your pursuit is simply about you, and it means you have to put yourself first, it creates almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of death and destruction, because there is nothing above you to whom or to which you believe you have a duty to. All the duty is to yourself. And what we're finding is that the individual cannot be his own God. There has to be something beyond the individual. And for most people, one of the struggles we have is that we pursue this aspect of happiness and joy and living your best self and pleasure and hedonistic preferences to the extreme. And we're found in that pursuit, this emptiness. Reason being, we've tossed aside all of these virtues that we were given as part of our spiritual gifts. And we've simply embraced the physical side, which is the lowest side of who we really are as humans. And the more we pursue self-pleasure, self-gratification, the more we suffer because we're minimizing the fruits of the Spirit. So, as I close today's session, let me leave you with the following to think about, to ponder on. And I would say as follows. Even if it's unlikely that you accept what I've shared so far, think about your life. And think about what I've shared about the fruits of the Spirit, the 7 deadly sins, and the virtues, the 7 virtues that we should have. Now, there are much more, but the 7 allows for some comparison. And ask yourself a simple question. What moral philosophy undergirds and guides your life? Is it based on Christian ethics? Is it based on perhaps some transcendental religion? Is it based on Islam? Is it based on Judaism? But is there an underlying philosophy of religion, some form of appeal to a higher authority greater than the individual self that undergirds your life? We find that in the absence of something divine, something placed as the hierarchy or at the hierarchy of what is good or a value system, we place ourselves in that position. And we cannot be our own gods. And people are suffering partly because they've been told to have a dream and to have a belief and to have some hope of something greater than self, and having a duty to that thing or to the people around you is perhaps old school, and that you should simply focus on what makes you happy. And we are finding that actually happiness can never be the goal. Sometimes it's the experience we get in pursuit of something greater than ourselves, and sometimes it's something we experience in hindsight by virtue of looking back and recognizing that the moments that you may have thought that were really, really awful had a reason and had a purpose. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.